There's no room for you this year. Please understand. That was the text Gianna received from her mother just a few days before Christmas. Not a call, not even a voicemail. A cold 8-word message. At first she thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone booked too many guests, but when she checked the family group chat filled with photos of the lakeside mansion decked out in lights, everyone clinking wine glasses and smiling, her stomach dropped. They had made room for everyone else, even her sister's new boyfriend, who they'd only met twice. But not for her, the only one in the family who had just landed the biggest deal of her career. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like your success didn't matter, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe for more true healing journeys. Gianna Eden, 29, was what some might call the artistic black sheep. While her cousins followed the path of finance, law, or medicine, Gianna chose color design and dreams. After years of freelancing and being told it was a hobby, she had finally signed a 6-figure contract with a global architecture brand. She wanted to celebrate that news with her family at the annual gathering at Lake Arrowhead, the sacred family estate where every winter memory lived. But behind the warmth of cinnamon-scented traditions and matching pajamas was an unspoken rule: only those who fit in were welcome. And Gianna had never fit in. Still, she never thought they'd actually shut her out. Not like this. Not without a word of congratulations, not even pretending they tried to make space. That night, staring at the untouched suitcase by her door, Gianna realized something. This wasn't just about this year. They never left a room for her because they never wanted her to belong. But was this really the first time they pushed her aside? Or had they been doing it her whole life, just more quietly? The snow hadn't started falling yet, but Gianna felt colder than she ever had. She sat alone on her apartment floor, surrounded by rolls of sketches and samples, evidence of the life she had built. Yet none of it seemed to matter when the people who were supposed to love her most had made it so clear she was not one of them. But this wasn't new. When Gianna was 9, she brought home a painting she'd spent weeks perfecting: watercolor trees, a splash of pink sunset, and a deer that looked more like a cat, but she was proud. Her teacher had entered it into a regional student art show. She remembered the joy bubbling in her chest as she showed it to her parents. Her mother smiled politely and said, "That's nice, honey. Now go help your sister with her science project. She's going to present in front of real scientists." Her father, he never even looked up from his email. That night, Gianna watched from the kitchen as her sister Emily got a full-on practice presentation with cue cards and a stopwatch, while her painting quietly slid behind the fridge. That was the first time she learned her passions were not real achievements. Over the years, she kept trying to earn their approval in ways they understood. She got into a traditional university, choosing graphic design instead of fine arts because it sounded more practical. But when she started working freelance doing logo work for small businesses designing coffee shop interiors, her family dismissed it as just a phase. Her uncle once joked during Thanksgiving, "So you just draw things and call it a career now?" Her aunt chimed in laughing, "Must be nice not having a real job." Even when she began getting clients in New York and San Francisco, they only ever asked, "When are you going to settle down? Do you have a backup plan? Will you ever go corporate?" Every dinner felt like a subtle interrogation, and no matter how far she climbed, she was still the eccentric one, the artsy dreamer, the one who didn't belong in the family's group photos that screamed traditional success. It wasn't just the words, it was the glances, the polite nods, the way conversations would shift when she spoke, and how her accomplishments were always met with quiet shrugs, while her cousin's promotion at an insurance firm earned toasts and applause. When her younger sister Emily got engaged, the family threw her an extravagant bridal shower at the very lake house Gianna now wasn't welcome at. Gianna designed custom invitations for the event, offered to do it for free. She overheard Emily saying, "Don't let her do it. I don't want it to look weird." Weird. That word stuck with her. Her designs were featured in Architectural Digest a month later, but not one family member mentioned it. Not a single congratulation. She began to realize they weren't just indifferent, They were willfully blind, because if they acknowledged her success, they'd have to confront the fact that she didn't need their mold to thrive. Still, Gianna kept hoping. Every family gathering she attended, she dressed a little safer, talked a little less. She even tried dating a guy from her father's golf club. He was boring but respectable. It didn't work. Nothing worked, because no matter what shape she squeezed herself into, she was still the other one. She had always thought that one day if she achieved enough, if she earned enough, if she smiled enough, they'd finally see her. But now, sitting alone in the silence of that apartment with that text still burned into her mind, she understood. They did see her. They just didn't want her. And that hurt more than being overlooked. It was rejection by design. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't her job to keep asking for a seat at a table that had already voted her out. Maybe it was time to build her own. And if she did, what kind of world could she create not just for herself, but for everyone else they had cast aside? It started with a joke. After rereading the text from her mother for the 100th time, Gianna opened her group chat with 3 other women designers and artists she had bonded with over the years. They'd all faced rejection in some form. So, should I just host a misfit Christmas? She typed, half laughing, half broken. Within seconds, replies flooded in. Yes, please do. Name the time and place, I'll bring the wine. That's when something shifted. For the first time in weeks, her chest didn't feel so tight. She looked around her apartment at the vision boards, the color palettes, the sketches. If her family didn't have room for her, fine. She'd build something better. Gianna searched for a venue and found it almost instantly, a historic lakefront inn on the other side of Lake Arrowhead, less polished than the family estate, but drenched in charm and potential. When she called the owner, a 70-year-old former art teacher said she'd be happy to rent it out at a discount, especially to someone doing something creative. Within 48 hours, Gianna had assembled a full retreat. Not just a holiday party, but an immersive experience, candlelit dinners, storytelling circles, creative workshops. Invitations went out to every misfit she knew, queer creators who had been shunned by their families, musicians whose dreams were mocked, single mothers who felt out of place during the holidays. She called it the room we made. What she didn't expect was how quickly it caught fire. One of the invitees, a wellness influencer with 500,000 followers, posted a teaser reel of the retreat preparations. It went viral. Suddenly, brands reached out offering to sponsor. Artists she had admired for years asked if they could attend or collaborate. Even Forbes Women requested an interview, and then came the email. From Martelli Design Group, the very firm that had once rejected her portfolio 4 years ago without even a thank you note. Now they wanted to feature her as part of their Faces Reshaping Design Culture in America series. Her hands shook, not from fear, from clarity. She no longer needed validation. But it was poetic justice that the very people who once shut doors on her were now asking her to walk through theirs. The retreat weekend arrived. Snow blanketed the lake like a stage curtain about to rise. Gianna stood at the door of the inn, watching car after car pull in. Guests spilled out, smiling, hugging, laughing. Some brought handmade ornaments. Others carried guitars, notebooks, or just open hearts. Inside, the rooms buzzed with joy and warmth. There were walls for people to pin the labels they were given and the truths they chose. There was a table of forgotten traditions, holiday foods that didn't fit the perfect family mold. In the middle of it all was Gianna, glowing not from attention but from belonging. She was no longer begging to be let in. She had let others in with her, but the true twist didn't come until the second night. She was helping arrange candles around the main fire pit when a car pulled into the driveway, sleek, black, quiet. A figure stepped out, red coat, leather gloves, silver hair pulled into a familiar knot. Her mother. Gianna froze. Her mom walked slowly, uncertain, as if unsure whether she was welcome. She looked at the building, at the warm yellow lights glowing from every window. Her face looked tired. Not from age, but from the weight of appearances. I heard about this place, her mother finally said. Emily saw it online. She said it looked beautiful and different, and I didn't know where else to go. Gianna didn't say a word. I don't want to fight, her mother continued. I know we've shut you out for years. I don't even know why anymore. Maybe because you reminded us of everything we didn't understand. Maybe we were afraid. She looked down, her voice cracking. But I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came to see what you built. And to say, you were right. Gianna's chest tightened, not in pain, but something more complicated. She thought she'd fantasized about this moment, the apology, the regret, the recognition. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like peace. She nodded toward the door. Come in, if you're ready to listen. Her mother hesitated. Will it be awkward? I don't want to make people uncomfortable. Gianna gave a small smile. It's not about comfort here, it's about truth. Inside, her mother sat quietly as a spoken word artist performed a piece about being disowned. A girl sang a lullaby in a language no one else understood, and still everyone cried. Someone passed her mother a mug of hot cider. She looked around, overwhelmed and perhaps for the first time in her life, humbled. Later that night, Gianna walked out to the porch expecting to be alone. But she found her father standing there holding an old photo, one of her as a child painting by the lake. I never said it back then, he whispered, but I kept this. And then came the words she never thought she'd hear. I'm proud of you, Gianna. I really am. But just when it seemed like the past had finally been laid to rest, a new revelation surfaced, one that would shake everything Gianna thought she knew about her family and herself. That night, the inn was quiet. Most of the guests had gone to sleep, their laughter echoing faintly through the hallways. Gianna sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, nursing a cooling cup of peppermint tea. Her body was tired, but her mind was running. The moment with her father had left her shaken. I'm proud of you. Words she had dreamed of hearing since she was old enough to understand disappointment, but something about how he said it, how he pulled the photo from his pocket like a long-lost relic, it didn't add up. Why now? Why this photo? She brought it inside and stared at the back. There was handwriting. Summer. Lake Arrowhead. Gianna's first gallery. She never had one as a child. She'd done a few school projects, sure, but nothing like that. The handwriting wasn't her father's. It was her Uncle Tony's, her mother's younger brother, the one no one ever talked about anymore. That was odd enough. But the real shock came the next morning. Gianna woke to find her mother in the kitchen quietly helping slice fruit for breakfast. They moved around each other in silence until Gianna finally asked, Where did Dad get this photo? Her mother glanced over. From the basement. Gianna tilted her head. But we don't keep family photos in the basement. There was a long pause. Then her mother spoke without looking up. No, we kept his things down there. Whose things? Her mother set the knife down. Tony's. It hit like a punch to the ribs. Uncle Tony. Her mother gave a tight nod. He used to be very close with you. When you were little. Before everything went sideways. Gianna blinked. Why didn't anyone tell me that? You were too young when he left. And later, we thought it was better not to bring him up. Why her mother hesitated again. Because he was like you. Gianna's breath caught. Like me, how creative, sensitive, rebellious maybe. He was always painting things, making things. Your grandparents hated it. Your father tolerated it, but eventually, Tony cut ties, moved to Portland, lived with, well, let's just say he chose a different life. Gianna's chest burned. You mean he was gay? Her mother nodded slowly. And that was enough to erase him. We didn't erase him, her mother said quickly. We just didn't know how to explain it. Gianna stared at her, a lifetime of confusion collapsing into a moment of sick clarity. You didn't know how to explain him. You didn't know how to explain me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Gianna tried to stay present, laughing with guests, guiding workshops, answering interviews, but inside her emotions were roiling. The retreat she'd built, the love she was finally receiving, the warmth from people who saw her, it was all real. But now it came with a new understanding. She hadn't just been excluded because she was different. She had been excluded because her difference scared them, because her family had already failed one child like her, and they were never going to let it happen again. That night, the final event of the retreat was a candlelight circle on the snowy lawn. Everyone was invited to speak a truth they had never said out loud before. Gianna listened to story after story about mothers who never said I love you, about partners who abandoned dreams, about churches that closed doors. When her turn came, she stood. The air was still. I spent most of my life thinking something was wrong with me, she began. I thought if I tried hard enough, acted normal enough, my family would finally let me in. But now I realize I was never the broken one. They were just afraid of what they didn't understand. She looked around the circle, and I don't want to be angry anymore, but I do want to be honest. I built this space because I was tired of waiting for permission to exist, and I hope no one here ever waits again. Applause broke the stillness, warm and tearful. People rose, hugged her, whispered thank yous, but one voice cut through the hum. I'm sorry I was one of them. It was her mother. Everyone turned. Her mother stepped into the circle, face pale but determined. I was scared. I judged what I didn't understand. I pushed away the people who reminded me of parts of myself I never dared explore. I lost my brother, and I nearly lost my daughter. She looked straight at Gianna. But I don't want to repeat that mistake. The crowd was silent. Gianna said nothing. She simply stepped forward and hugged her mother. But even as they held each other, Gianna knew healing wasn't a single gesture. It was a choice every day to keep showing up, to stay soft even after being broken. The next morning, a snowstorm rolled in. Guests left slowly, lingering with long goodbyes and promises to return next year. Gianna stayed behind, cleaning up, grateful and grounded. But when she walked back into her room to collect her things, she found a small brown envelope on the bed. Her name was written on it in shaky handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a note. Gianna, your uncle would have loved this place. He had dreams like yours once. Find him. He's still out there. While Gianna sat down overwhelmed, she had thought the story was ending, but it was only just beginning. So when the last guest left and the snow began to fall heavier, Gianna picked up her phone and dialed a number she never thought she'd look for, ready to face the man her family had buried in silence and a past that just might rewrite everything. Gianna sat alone in the inn's sunroom, curled into a worn leather chair as soft light filtered through the frosted windows. The retreat was over, the last traces of laughter and movement now replaced by quiet and the scent of burnt cedar. She held the envelope in her lap, her mother's handwriting still fresh in her mind. Find him. He's still out there. The note stirred something deep in her. Not just curiosity, but a hunger for wholeness. The idea that someone in her bloodline had felt what she felt, dreamed in colors like she did, and was exiled for it, it wasn't just heartbreaking. It was galvanizing. All her life she had chased acceptance from a family that had forgotten its own outcasts. But maybe it was time to stop chasing. Maybe it was time to gather. The next morning, Gianna walked through the snow to the boathouse at the edge of the property. Her mentor and longtime friend Elise, a sculptor in her late 50s with streaks of silver in her braids, was sketching by the frozen lake. You look like someone just found a ghost, Elise said with a warm smile, not looking up. Gianna handed her the note. Elise read it in silence, then exhaled slowly. Tony, your uncle. You knew him? Gianna asked. Met him once. Years ago at an art summit in Oregon. He had the same eyes as you. Gianna blinked, stunned. He was magnetic, Elise went on. Raw, honest, a little reckless. But his work. Gianna, his work was alive. He showed me this sculpture he made from reclaimed wood and sea glass. It was like watching grief sing. Gianna sat down on the bench beside her. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Elise shrugged. Because when people erase someone from the family story, they hope time will bury the discomfort. But art has a funny way of keeping spirits alive. There was a pause before Gianna asked quietly, Should I look for him? Elise turned to her, full of gentleness and steel. That's not the real question. The real question is, are you ready to meet the part of yourself they tried to erase? That night, Gianna couldn't sleep. She sat cross-legged on her bed, journal in her lap, candles flickering around her like quiet witnesses. She wrote everything: the shame, the loneliness, the pride she pretended not to feel, the names of people who saw her, the names of people who didn't. Then she drew a line, and on the next page she wrote, "I don't want a seat at their table anymore. I want to build my own." The next morning she made 2 calls, first to a property agent in Portland. She wanted to find artists spaces in the city, places she could live and work part-time, maybe host open studios. Second, to the phone number she had traced online the night before. It rang, once, twice, then hello. The voice was warm, cautious, older than she remembered from the photos. "Hi," she said, her voice steady. "I think you're my uncle." "Tony." A pause. Then laughter, soft, breathless, stunned. "Well, he said that would make you my favorite niece, wouldn't it?" Over the following weeks, Gianna's life began to bend toward a new direction. Not away from her past, but beyond it. She still designed for the luxury firm, but she reduced her hours. She began mentoring young artists, especially those who had been shunned like she once was. And in March, she flew to Portland. Tony met her at a small train station just outside the city. He looked just like the photo, but older, quieter, and a little weary. When they hugged, something inside her clicked. This was the missing thread. They talked for hours. He showed her his studio, cluttered and beautiful. He cried when she told him about the retreat. She cried when he handed her an old painting she'd made at 5'1" her parents had thrown away, but he had secretly saved and carried for decades. "You weren't the only one who felt like they didn't belong," he whispered, "but now we do." Back in Lake Arrowhead, her family continued on mostly unchanged. Her mother called now and then, haltingly, awkwardly, but she tried. Her father sent a Christmas card with a photo of her at the retreat. Her sister apologized over text for her silence at Thanksgiving, adding a cautious, "I'm proud of what you're building." Gianna didn't expect perfection. She didn't need it. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for the door to open. She had walked through her own. And as Gianna lit a candle one evening in her Portland studio preparing for her first joint exhibit with Tony, she realized she hadn't just changed her story, she'd rewritten the family's legacy. The opening night of the Portland exhibit arrived with a crisp breeze and the scent of pine. The studio, once an old mechanic's shop, was now alive with light jazz playing low in the background and walls adorned with raw, breathtaking pieces. Gianna's installations glowed with stories of exclusion and rebirth. Tony's sculptures whispered of memory, of pain turned to purpose. The local press had picked up their story, a niece and uncle reunited after decades of silence, using art to reclaim what was stolen. Invitations had been sent months in advance. But there was one name on the list that shocked everyone: Eleanor Russo, Gianna's mother. She arrived in silence. No entourage, no heirs. Just her in a cream coat she hadn't worn since her husband's funeral. Gianna didn't flinch. She nodded politely, greeted other guests, and let her mother walk the exhibit alone. There was one piece in particular that stopped Eleanor cold: a shadow box filled with torn rejection letters, old sketchbooks salvaged from the trash, and a childhood photo of Gianna at Lake Arrowhead, eyes wide, holding a paintbrush face smudged with color. Below it, the plaque read, "The room I built when I was locked out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor didn't say a word. She simply turned and left. But the damage, or perhaps the truth, had landed. That week, articles circulated nationwide: "Artist once shunned by family now reclaims legacy." "The house that didn't want her, now she builds her own." Gianna didn't respond to press calls. She didn't need to. Her art had already spoken. And back at the lake, that so-called sacred family villa bookings began to drop. Whispers spread in town about the girl they left out and the empire she built from that exile. Justice hadn't come with rage, it had arrived in grace, in brilliance, in permanence. But the final word didn't come from the media nor from Eleanor. It came in the form of a letter one Gianna would open in the final scene. The letter came weeks later. No return address, just her name written in that all-too-familiar script. Inside was a single line handwritten on monogrammed stationery. "I still don't understand you. But I see now that doesn't mean you were wrong." Mom Gianna folded the letter not with bitterness but with quiet grace. She didn't need her mother's approval anymore. But acknowledgement, that was something else entirely. Outside, spring was beginning to thaw the last snow. In her Portland studio, surrounded by work that bore her truth, Gianna felt something she hadn't in years. Stillness, clarity, peace. She no longer needed to shrink to fit inside someone else's version of home. She had carved one of her own, one with wide-open doors, vibrant walls, and room for every kind of voice. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stop asking for permission to belong. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. What room did you have to build for yourself? Tell us in the comments.